This fantastic little plane only cost $50 to make. Let me show you how to make one yourself.
Oh my God, dude, you scared me. Just knock before you walk into an eagle's nest next time, all right? What if I had been sitting on an egg? Rude. Well, now that you're here, we might as well talk about the greatest idea that's ever existed. America. And you know what makes America the most freedom-loving, hot-dog-eating, woodworking-doing country on the planet? 3 things. Freedom, hot dogs, and woodworking. And what do you get when you smash those 3 things together? You get Freedom Hot Dogs and the Woodworkers Guild of America, who also happen to be the sponsor of this week's video. Woodworkers Guild of America is your online resource for woodworking instructions, ideas, and information. With premium videos like optimizing a burl log or squaring up your drill press, which I particularly appreciate because of the whole, lack of opposable thumbs thing. Woodworkers Guild of America's professional instructors walk you through each technique with step-by-step demonstrations, providing their expert tips and tricks along the way. Now, you may be asking yourself, why should I take advice from an eagle? Well, for one, I'm the flagging symbol of freedom. So, if you want to see what Woodworkers Guild of America has to offer, check out the link below. The first 1,000 of you to click the link in the description will get a full year of premium membership to the Woodworkers Guild of America for only $1.49. And a big freedom-loving thank you to the Woodworkers Guild of America for sponsoring this week's video.
Now, there are many different types and styles of wooden-bodied planes. They've been around much, much longer than metal-bodied planes. First and foremost, you have your smoother, right? This is kind of your traditional oval-ish body. It's a little bit more rounded, a little more comfortable to hold in the hand. No handle or tote behind the blade. It's just a piece of wood with a blade in it that holds it at an angle that you can use. You also have these transition style planes, which is essentially a wooden soled bodied plane with metal mechanisms in there to adjust the blade, both height in the depth of cut and laterally to adjust the setting to the sole. And then you've got a longer sole plane. This one kind of sits in the 4-plane or jointer plane family. It's a little bit shorter than a traditional joiner, but it's in this razzie style. I learned that word recently. It's in this razzie style of plane where you have this scoop, this cutout at the back. This was apparently used by boat makers quite often. I do find it very comfortable. I like this style of plane as far as its functional use goes. And then lastly, this is the plane that I made when I was in school. This is a Krenov style plane, essentially meaning that there is a rotating pin in the center and it's held in by a wedge and it's cut and laminated together in the way that James Krenov did. This one is quite blocky because when I was in school, the idea was just to learn how to make the plane. We weren't trying to make pieces to sell. We were just trying to make functional tools. And this is the style of plane that I'm going to make. So let's dive into it. All right, we're in good shape. I've got my blank cut and what I need to do now. Well, first of all, before I get into what I'm about to do, I should get into what I just did. Essentially, I had a piece of maple that was thick enough but not wide enough, so I laminated those two pieces together. You can see I'm getting a little bit of a book match effect in the chatoyance being slightly different because I cut it and then folded it over. And it's looking beautiful, it's looking great. Then I milled it down to the proper length. Now I'm pulling dimensions both from my Stanley number 4 and the wooden number 4 that lives on the wooden smoother that lives on top of my tool cabinet. So this plane is gonna be 9 inches-ish long, and you could make it a little bit longer. It could live anywhere in the smoother to jack plane family, kind of in the 9 to 13, 14 inch range. I want one that's a little bit smaller because I don't have a compact wooden plane at this moment. Then I've gone ahead and ripped off my cheeks. My cheeks are about 5/16 of an inch thick. So thick enough to give some structural rigidity when I glue them back on, but not so thick that they look funky and you just got all this extra meat outside the piece. My internal blank, my centerpiece, which is where I'm gonna cut the bedding angle and the relief out of, that is about a 32nd wider than the blade. Now this is a Hawk blade. It's gonna be great. It's gonna do the job for me. It's 2 inches wide, and so my blank is about 2 1/32. You could go up a little bit higher than that. You could go to 2 1/16. Hell, you can go to 2 1/8 if you want, if you feel strongly about that. A 32nd is plenty for me to get a little bit of lateral adjustment. Also, when I plane these nice and flat, I want to make sure that they are dead flat. I want to minimize the amount of clamping pressure I have, and I don't want to introduce any tension into these pieces when I do re-laminate these things. Let's get back to work. All right, we are ready to glue this thing up. Now, a couple of details that I think are important that are going to be hard to show you post glue up. The first, and maybe primary, see if I can get it to focus on that, I have left the ends of the pins a little proud just to give it a little bit of tactile experience. Now that is going to not allow me to flatten and square the sides to the sole, which means this is never going to be a shooting plane, but I don't need it to be a shooting plane. I have other planes that are longer and flatter that I can use as shooting planes. So that's an aesthetic and tactile choice that I'm making, just means that I had to clean up the sides now. Secondly, with that pin, again, let's see if we can get this to focus. I've made this thing taper to a point. Now, that is primarily an aesthetic decision, but also I think that is when that thing kind of, this is not going to be glued in, so it's going to rotate freely in there, and whatever position the wedge ends up being in kind of permanently or semi-permanently, then that's going to allow it to have a little bit more surface area and have, in theory, a little bit more clamping pressure for the wedge to the blade. I don't know if it's actually going to do anything. I think it's more an aesthetic decision than anything else. But hey, it looks sexy. And other than that, I've opened up the mouth just enough to allow the blade to protrude just past 1/8 of an inch, which is going to be the thickness of the secondary bottom that I put on this plane. So All of that being the case, it's time to glue this thing up. So here is where things stand currently. The plane is done, it's working, and if I wanted to stop here, I totally could. However, it's a little bit bulky. It doesn't feel very good in the hand, and that's partially because this heel is so fat. So I'm gonna do a lot of shaping. Number one, to make it look sexy, but number two, and primarily, to make it feel better and more usable in the hand. The way I'm going to do that is just by refining these lines and creating these large facets at the front and back. But you could just take it off the bandsaw and remove a bunch of material. I believe, to my understanding, that that's how Krenov left his planes, was just kind of usable, we'll call it. Now, as far as the wedge goes, what I've done, let's pop this out. So I've got this tiny itty bitty little wedge, and it's gonna get the job done. This angle is cut at about 5 degrees. So it will seat all the way in, and it wedges in there nice and tight, and it holds everything tight. And I checked it before I actually went to the next stage to make sure that it was going to cut. It is going to cut. It's not refined just yet as far as the blade and sharpness and everything else goes. But I think we are closing in on the final steps now. So now that the sole is flattened, the wedge is made, and the iron is cutting, it's time to do a bunch of shaping on the body of this plane. So there it is, friends. That is a brand new smoother. Listen, this was an informative process. I learned quite a bit about a skill set that I don't have, namely plane making. Like if I were to make this again, immediately what I would do looking at Japanese style planes is move this entire assembly back quite a bit, because I found already that this is quite a bit more comfortable to pull than it is to push. I'll do both. I do both with my metal bodied planes, but I think I would move that from the first third to the back third, and I'd be curious to see how that changes the application, the use of this tool. A couple of other things, I've noticed that my wedge pin is actually slightly canted, which is okay. It's not ideal, but all that means is I had to taper my wedge down to one side. So it's the things like this, this is the first plane I've ever made on my own. The big gap behind the cutting edge here to the back of the throat, I think that is creating a large enough gap where it actually could potentially get caught on that in the future. So if, again, I were to do this again, I wouldn't remove any material from that leading edge when I go to pre-assemble this plane. Just little things like that, that you learn from doing the thing. But here's the thing, is it perfect? No. Was it ever going to be perfect? Of course it wasn't. It's the first plane that I've made myself. And if I were to do it again, of course there would be things that I would do differently. But that's why you do things, is to learn about how they work. And then the second iteration and the third iteration get better and better every time. I do like the little buttons sticking out here. I think that just gives a nice tactile finish to it. I've seen a lot of people actually recess those in, presumably so that you can square the sides to the sole and use it to shoot. But again, I'm not going to do that. I have other planes that I'll use to shoot. But from an ergonomics perspective, I like it. I like the weight. I like the short-bodied sole of it. I may put a heavier camber on here and use this as more of like a, not a texturing plane, that's not the right word, but using this as a smoother to leave behind a plain finish. That might be its proper application. So we'll see over time how this gets implemented into the workflow, but the quality of surface I'm getting off of this plane, fantastic. It is quite literally perfect, and this is pretty figured maple. That's that, friends. I'm gonna play around with this a little bit, and we'll see. We'll see if I can implement it into an upcoming project. What I will say is I do quite like these lines here, how these lines grow and fade with the curvature of the body. That's pretty sexy. I'm gonna give myself a little credit on that one. But for now, I'm gonna get back to work. I hope this was an interesting video. I hope you learned a thing. And I encourage you to go try to make a plane, because this cost me $0 in materials. This was scrap maple. This was a piece of gidgee that I've had lying around for years upon years and never really found a thing to do with it. So it cost me, in the ebony that I used, also just scrap that I've had in a bucket for years. So it cost me $40 in a blade and some time. That's it. So go make a thing. Go figure it out. Go mess it up. Go do it again. And learn and grow as woodworkers. And if you want to check out all of the links that I always mention every week, Patreon, t-shirts, merch, and what's the other one? The podcast with Paul and Mary. Go check those out in the links below, and I will catch y'all in the next video. Cheers.